Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual classroom on Waiver Reimagine. Hopefully you're settling in and you can hear me just fine. We had word find there to keep you engaged or interested a little bit before we got started. And some of you that actually did this and want to know where the answers are, here they come. So let's see here. There we go. So family residential services and community residential services, individualized home supports, day support services, and integrated community supports. And we'll talk about all these today as we go through our virtual class. So I'm Angie Hart. Welcome. Glad you are able to make it today. I have Ketty Torrey helping me in the background, so she'll be the one managing our Q&A and kind of questions you might have, helping out with those things. A little bit about me. I started in the field 27 years ago. So 27 years ago, and I've done just about everything. Direct care, manager, QMRP when it was called that back in the day, a director. I've been at STAR since 2001, and from my work at STAR, I've been overseeing our consulting and training services and working with people with a variety of situations and disabilities and helping providers throughout the whole state of Minnesota. So this today is Waiver Reimagine, and this is the Cliff Notes, or I think that was my generation. I think the kids these days, they use Spark Notes, or my kids just say, well, you just Google it, right? But this is the Cliff Notes version of Waiver Reimagine. DHS has provided a ton of information, both written, through webinars, through emails. There's information on their web pages. So we're going to link and give you quick access to all of that. But this is, again, kind of just a quick overview. And it's really intended for 245D licensed providers, for those of you that are providing services, but I know we have a variety of people that are in this class today, and hopefully this is a good enough overview and summary that it works and fits for whatever your role might be. All right, so real quick with Zoom handouts, there's a link in the link that you clicked on to get to this class. The handouts are there. Also, Ketty has put that in the Q and in the chat feature. So if you open up chat, you'll see the link to the handouts. And for this class, so it's in the chat, it's in the email, and then also for this class, just for participation, we're not going to do a ton. We have a lot of people on this class today, which is great. But just real quick with Zoom, if you're not familiar with Zoom, your audio is in that bottom left corner, and when you click on it, you get a window you won't need your speaker, or excuse me, you won't need your microphone, but you can adjust your speaker that way. You can raise your hand at the bottom and then lower your hand if you want attention. Ketty will be able to jump in and connect with you and see if there's something she can help you with. Question and answer is really where we're funneling all of our questions to. So when you click on question and answer, a window pops up, and then you just type in your information in that bottom part. And then that gets sent to Ketty and I, or me, and we'll answer those questions. We're really holding questions towards the end, but you can type them in throughout the presentation, and then Ketty will be asking them, and I'll answer at the end of the session today. But hopefully this will be a broad overview that will really hopefully answer a lot of your questions as we go through. All right, and then you can adjust your view at the top there for your how you want to see the screen. Okay, so to get started, we have polls. That's the other interaction we have, and those will just pop right up on your screen, and you just click your answers. And our question and answers do not go out to the whole group. I should have clarified that. It just comes to Ketty and me. So we'll see them, and then we'll verbally answer them, or if Ketty knows, she'll type the answer to you. And then polls, they're anonymous too. So go ahead and click, what is your role? Are you here as a 245D licensed provider? Are you a different waiver provider? Are you a case manager? Are you a person that receives services or a self-advocate? Are you a family member? Are you a lead agency staff or other? I know there's so many different roles in our field, so I couldn't necessarily capture everyone. All right, we've got 67% of you participating, and I'm still wrapping up, so we'll give you about 10 more seconds to click your answer if you want to say who you are or what role you play. I know a lot of you maybe do multiple hats and different roles. Maybe you're a 245D licensed provider, and you also have a full-time job working as a case manager or something else. We have a lot of people that play multiple roles. All right, so most of you are 245D licensed providers. We have a scattering of other roles too, so well, welcome. So glad that you're all here today with us. All right, and then the next poll we have is select all that apply. So if you are a 245D licensed provider, you may click multiple answers. If you don't provide 245D licensed services, you can just click at the bottom. There's that option, we don't provide any 245D. But it's always good to see as we talk about different services and how services are changing and what they're going to look like. It's nice to see who's out there for impact. And you guys are participating wonderfully, so that's great. We're going to give you about 10 more seconds to get your answers in. We want to move quick so we can get through all the material today. All right. So good to see. Thank you all for participating. We've got a good variety of people out there today. Wonderful. So thank you very much for participating. Okay, so Waiver Reimagine. So today we're here to talk about Waiver Reimagine. And the whole goal of the project was to streamline and simplify services for people receiving the disability waiver services in Minnesota. I remember, my goodness, it was early 2000s, talking with providers and people saying, boy, things are so complex. You know, I wish there was just a common service menu. I wish there was the same service available to someone on a brain injury waiver as there is on someone on a DD waiver. So it's interesting because that was conversations 20 years ago that people were saying, this is so complicated, this is so confusing. Why can't things be a little simpler for everyone? And that's what this is, right? This is a process to get simple. And, you know, if you think about it, you know, 10 years ago, a group home could have 4 people that receive support and living in that home, and 1 person on the brain injury waiver having foster care and following foster care standards, someone on a developmental disabilities waiver needing to follow 245B at the time. And so it was complex and it was confusing and it wasn't across the board. So Minnesota had to work with a number of things. Number one, CMS asked that Minnesota needed to get kind of streamlined standards that for all waiver systems, that all waivers follow the same licensing standard. So 245D came into place. So now we have one standard across the waivers, the disability waivers, and now looking to say, how do we get those services to get streamlined and similar across the board? And there's more changes coming soon, which we'll talk about. All right. So today we're going to talk about both phases. Primarily phase 1, though, is where we're going to spend most of our time, and that is to simplify services. And that is a lot of work that DHS has done over the last few years to get ready for this, working with federal approval, with CMS, working legislatively at the Minnesota level to make sure things were aligning. And that work continues as they move on to phase 2. So phase 1 is about simplifying those services. Phase 2, as we look to the future, is about continuing to simplify the waivers. So instead of having 4 disability waiver services, moving on to 2 disability waiver services, and then developing the service and implementing the service planning tool and individual budget models for people that are receiving services. So a lot of future changes, but again, today we're primarily talking about phase 1. And what does that mean? And when is that occurring? So some of you might be going, I know what's happening right now, and it is for many people. So service transition for someone that's on a service that is changing or transitioning to a new name, a new service, is happening upon their service reassessment, so their annual reassessment. So that's typically, you know, things are happening around that with new service agreements, new min choices reassessment, and that is happening on or after January 1st for people on the brain injury, CAC, and DD waiver, because that approval came before January 1st. Those on the CADI waiver, the CADI approval from the federal government didn't occur until January 11th. So CADI waiver, it's January 11th and later. So that is at their service agreement. So if someone had an annual renewal date, a reassessment date of January 31st, then they will be transitioning to the new services if their current services are lining up to transition. So any reassessment that just is their annual reassessment and that new service agreement, any reassessment or because of that occurs after, so for any other reason that there might be a reassessment that happens, maybe it happens because of change in services, change in providers, they change because they get off the waiver and come back on the waiver, or someone that had not been on the waiver and now is coming onto the waiver, they're going to jump into the new services. So anytime there's a need or a service change, that's when that's going to happen, even if it occurs before their reassessment date. So the system updates that had to happen behind the scenes, and 245D providers, you're probably not as aware or involved in these different things, but case managers and those of you that are lead agencies, you are. A lot of this had to get into place and was put into place in December. So the rate management system was updated, min choices, assessment and support plan were updated, MMIS for that system, and then the HCPCS for the billing codes, and some people call them procedure codes or billing codes. Those all need to be updated as well. All right, our next poll. Has any of you that are providing services or a case manager or playing a role in supporting people transitioned to the new service? So no, not yet. Yes, it went just fine. Yes, it could have gone better. Some of you might be saying, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we've done this yet or not. So go ahead and click in, and we'll give us just about 10 more seconds to get answers in. You guys are great at participating, so very good job. All right, so we'll go ahead and launch the results. So a good chunk of you, not yet, have not had anyone that's transitioned. Some of you, it's gone fine. That's great to hear. Some might have found some little hiccups along the way, and we know that that's out there, and DHS knows that's out there. We'll talk about how do you get help, how do you work through those. And then some of you are not sure, and that's okay to not know. You'll know eventually when it's time for someone to transition. All right, so as we talk today, I'm going to be referencing just a lot of links, and we have hyperlinks built into your handout. So if you have a printed out handout, it's not going to work, but if you have the electronic version of the handout and the PDF, you can just click on these hyperlinks and they will bring you right to the website. So this hopefully helps organize the material for you and helps you get through it. So we're going to be talking about these services, but here's a quick place to find the snapshot of everything. And that is a Waiver Reimagine Streamlined Service Crosswalk. So that maroon text on that slide is where you want to click on to get to see what services changed and what does it look like. And it's a great layout. They did a beautiful job getting it organized. And you can see that they talk about what was the old service name, what waivers was it available on, what were the old HCPCS, what is the new streamlined service name, now what waivers is it available on, and what are the new HCPCS. And then it even tells you that DWRS frameworks and what you want to use for that service. So this is a great, this is probably the one tool that is the highest priority for you if you really want to kind of have a good overview. But we're going to break this down and talk about each one category by category. And then as we go through, we'll have links to all the resources that DHS has available. All right, so we'll first talk about those residential services. And we're talking about the family residential. So family foster care, the family, the license holder lives in the home and is supporting people that have moved into their home with them, and they are providing foster care. So family foster care, either child or adult, and that was on the brain injury, CAC, and CADI waivers. For people on the developmental disability waiver, it was called family supported living services. And that's all transitioning to family residential services moving forward. So that is the new service name, is family residential services, and then it's being classified either as child for kids that are younger, and then adults for adults. And then the CBSM, the Community-Based Service Manual from DHS, is a great resource that you want to use. And the link here brings you right to the description for family residential services. And if you've never been to the CBSM to learn about services, it is a great resource because it lays out what is the service, who is eligible, what are the qualifications for a provider, what are the restrictions. It's just a great overview, and really it's what you want to be referencing if you're a provider and you want to start services, if you're a case manager and you're wanting to see what services are a good fit and want to give informed choice to people about what might be a best fit for them. Using this might be a great way to provide that information. All right, so that is family residential. So then community, so group homes, corporate group homes where the house is licensed and the license holder does not live in that home with the people. Oftentimes it's shift staff coming in to provide support. That is transitioning to the new service called Community Residential Services. And all these homes have a community residential setting license under 245D, or they should. So these are corporate foster care and corporate SLS for children. And that's becoming community residential services for a child, or corporate foster care or corporate SLS was a service that was being provided in the home. That's now going to be called community residential services, and they're offered in a licensed community residential setting under 245D. And there again is the link to learn more about community residential services. All right, and these are, well, we'll keep moving along. I quickly get ahead of myself. So, all right, so supported living services. We have a number of people in Minnesota that have a home of their own apartment, their own house, or whatever living situation it might be, but it's theirs. They're in control of it, it's theirs, or it might be their families. Maybe the family doesn't live with them, but the family is the one that is subleasing to them, or whatever it might be. SLS own home for adults. And that is changing. So that was a daily unit rate, and that is changing to be broken apart. And that really the person receiving services and their team, the case manager, guardians, or whoever else might be involved in helping them make decisions, have to decide what services are going to best fit their need. And it's going to be looking at all of the services available to see what does fit. So we know for sure that individualized home supports with training, which we'll talk about soon, for sure is probably going to be a service match for this service. But then also other pieces might need to come in to help with overnights, and that might be night supervision or 24-hour emergency or technology. There are many, many services that might be grouped together that might help meet the needs of the person receiving services. So at the bottom of the screen, we have the link for the CBS own home. So that's really important language, is that you know, does this qualify as someone's own home? Are they in control? Is it their home? And then what services can be allowed, and what would they be eligible for, and what would make the best fit for their needs. And then we have the individualized home support link, but you'll want to read all the CBSM services that are available under the waivers, especially for the waiver the person's on, to see what might be the best fit, to look at what are their needs and what can we do to make those, make the situation work for that person. So that is a big change. And I know that this is a big thing that as people were creative and trying to find ways to give people and support people as independently in a life that they wanted, this might be a bigger change for people. And it doesn't mean that people can't live in those settings. It's how do we piece together the services that they need to thrive and do well in these kind of settings. All right. So now we're switching to unit-based. And unit-based is a term that I've heard for a long time, and I wonder if we'll get away from that terminology, because so many of our services have moved from daily rates to unit-based. But when I think of unit-based, it's usually services that are being provided in someone's own home, or if they're living with their family still, the family home. It's not usually 24 hours a day. It is something that's just being provided a certain number of hours a week. So the biggest change is this individualized home supports is the name of the new service that's being provided. And a number of services are funneling into this new service. And individualized home supports, and you can see I have kind of a parentheses around the S, because when you read the CBSM, it has an S. When you read it in 245D, there's no S. So I'm sure it'll all get sorted out. It's so hard, I'm sure, to coordinate language with CMS and CBSM documentation, and legislatively as well. So I'm sure we'll see it standardized across the board. But right now, when you read 245D, you see no S, but when you read some of the other documentation from DHS, you're going to see that it has the S. Anyway, so it's divided into 3 different categories. So the CBSM has one page on this, and it has information about without training, with training, or with family training. And it really depends on what service it is and where the person's living. So we'll talk about each one of these. So individualized home supports without training. So the current services are adult companion and personal support. So if you're providing adult companion or personal support to a person when it's their reassessment time, or their service needs change, or they change a provider, it is going to transition to individualized home supports without training. So IHS, and as some of you have maybe been typing this, every time I type IHS, my autocorrect changes it to his, but it's not. It's IHS without training. So adult companion and personal support were basic services under 245D. So you're following the basic service standards and only needing to do the basic paperwork for 245D. And as it transitions to individualized home supports, it continues without training. It continues as a basic service. So it's still a basic service, still the same paperwork requirements, still the same compliance requirements for 245D. So that's And you can read through, again, you'll want to read through. If you're providing adult companion, you're providing personal support, you're going to want to click on that CBSM hyperlink that we have, individualized home support, to get there and read about without training. What does the service entail? What can be included? What shouldn't be included? How does someone qualify? All that information is located on that CBSM page. So great reference. And again, for this, it is without training. So it's learning that new tag there of what category is this. So that is without training. The next set of services are a group that is transitioning to individualized home support with training. So there was a service called Individualized Home Support Services, and it was only added in the last few years. I can't even remember when it was added, but it was pretty recent that it was added. Maybe it was just last year, I'm not sure. But that was a basic service. So that's transitioning to individualized home supports with training. So if you actually were serving anyone that had this service, or maybe your case manager that was authorized, that's changing to individualized home supports with training. Independent living skills training is changing to individualized home supports with training. And then supported living services, people living in their own home that had SLS as maybe a daily unit, that is changing to individualized home supports with training. So again, these are 15-minute unit, although there's different categories and different HCPCs to choose, but usually it's a 15-minute. And the CBSM, again, you want to click on that to see that. So now the distinction with this is that individualized home supports and independent living skills, or independent living skills, let me clarify. ILS was a intensive service under 245D, but because there's exception language in 245D, it was allowed to follow basic service standards. So the paperwork was reduced, the standards were reduced for ILS. As all these services transition into individualized home supports with training, it's an intensive service, and that exception is not in 245D. So the language is not giving that exemption to follow in basic services. You have to follow intensive. So when you say, well, what does that mean? What do I have to do? Here's a very quick overview. So if you are providing a basic service, ILS, that is now intensive as individualized home supports with training, for new people coming on, they need a 45 or 60-day meeting. It's 45 service days or 60 calendar days. After service initiation, the team needs to come in. So case managers, it's important that that meeting is occurring. Providers, making sure that you have that for any new people that are coming in. So not transitions, but new. But for all the people that are transitioning, you're going to want to make sure that your CSSP addendum that you need to write is meeting all the intensive service standards requirements. There's quite a bit more that needs to be included in that intensive addendum than there does in the basic. For outcomes, you need to have formal goals, outcomes developed and written that meet the standards of 245D. Providers, you also want to do the self-management assessment. You need to have an assessment that manages the person's ability to self-manage in different areas. So you'll want to make sure you get that in place. And then an annual meeting is required too for intensive services, and that's different than for basic. So the standards for intensive can be found in 245D.071. And I have that right at that bottom of that slide there. You can click on that hyperlink and it will open up Minnesota statute 245D right there at that part. And you can read through that. If reading statute's not your thing, we have a lot of classes. We teach a lot about how to provide compliant services. This web page, which you can see the hyperlink at the bottom, you click on that, it will bring you right there. And I highlighted or circled some of the classes that may be most of interest to you. So, person-centered approach to progress reviews and team meetings, person-centered outcomes, what's due when for DCs and DMs for intensive services, writing the CSSP addendum for intensive services, writing the self-management assessment. So those are all ones that might be a great fit for you. You click on that and you're able to watch them. We have some coming up live that you can join in just like today and watch. And we have many of them that have been previously offered and are recorded, and they're available on demand. So you're able to get to this web page, you just scroll to the bottom and you can register for an on-demand session and watch. And they're much more engaging than this. This is like a data dump. I'm just trying to give you as much information in a short amount of time. But that's where that is. So I know that this is a big change for many, many providers in the state. And I want to make sure that you know what the change is. So it doesn't mean right now you need to get everything in place, but as each person's annual meeting happens, or if their needs change, that's when, again, the service will change. And that's when I'm assuming the standards, as far as what legislation says and what statute says, that's what we need to follow. All right. And then finally, if even classes are not your thing, so reading statutes not your thing and classes are not your thing, we do one-on-one consulting too. So you can schedule an appointment with a consultant and they'd be happy to walk through different requirements, help you do it, show you how to do it, and teach it to you one-on-one. Those are all things that are available too. And for consulting, you can just click on that link. All right. So that was one thing that I really wanted to highlight. There are some intensive services in 245D that still get to follow the basic standard, and that is positive support services, in-home and out-of-home crisis respite, and specialist services. So to see the language about all this and where is this exception found, the exception is in 245D.071 subdivision 1. So that is where you want to go to find out, and you can read through, and it's a little confusing. You just follow the hyperlinks back and forth between the different parts of 245D. So that is a big change in our field that I really want providers to be aware of. And I think if you have questions around this, you can contact your 245D licensor to say, you know, what are their expectations around this and how do you comply best with this? Okay, so moving back to the service changes, individualized home supports being the new service, and that new category, that third category is with family training. So with family training is a service where the person lives with their family. They're still in their family home, and they were probably receiving in-home family supports that were coming in and providing services. We see this with many people that are still children, but it could also be others. And in-home family supports is changing to individualized home supports with family training. And again, IHFS was a intensive services, and again, it will continue to be an intensive service as IHS with family training. So again, persons living with their family, staff is coming in and delivering in-home family supports at their reassessment date, or when needs change, or if they get off the waiver and come back on the waiver, any of those reasons, they're going to transition to individualized home supports with family training. And again, that one individualized home support CBSM page is going to break down the 3 categories. You can read through that. You can read about eligibility, about requirements, all of those things. So again, the CBSM is a great resource. It's something that I probably am in every day. Every day I'm referencing that for providers. Okay, so we're switching now from those services that are provided in the people's home or in the community, and we're now looking at day services. So day services are those DT&H services that were happening for people during the day. So day services, that DT&H, like I said, and structured day is moving to be called day support services. So this is no longer daily rates. This is a 15-minute billing unit that a provider can bill for, and it's day support services. So again, it is kind of that teasing out of, as we in Minnesota look at employment and really making sure that people with disabilities know that the options for employment and the options for competitively and community-based employment is available. This is kind of saying, well, there are a lot of people that maybe are choosing not to have employment yet, that they are just looking for activities and support during the day to develop skills and learn new things. And those are becoming day support services. So again, the CBSM link for day support services can be found. And another little piece is happening, you know, transportation. Sometimes things have been bundled in the past, and we've had a lot of changes over the waivers over the last few years, but transportation is being separated out. So transportation is a waiver transportation that's being used as a separate service along with the day support service. All right, and then pre-vocational services is still being pre-vocational services. So the old service is still being called pre-vocational. The change is that now it's available on all the waivers. So it used to be only for people with on the brain injury or the CADI waiver. Now it's on the BI, CAC, CADI, and DD waivers. So people that received pre-vocational services before 2021 can continue. Those that come onto the service new will have a limit of 3 years. So that's a new change too for pre-vocational, unless there's reasons for an exception. And then there's a whole list of reasons for exceptions. So that CBSM link that you see there at the bottom of that screen, that maroon thing that says CBSM pre-vocational services, that you want to go there and read through all of those pieces and have all that information for any of the people you support that are currently receiving pre-vocational or that want to in the future. So those are some changes around that, but it's still being called pre-vocational, just more available to more people on more waivers, and there are some service limits. Okay, all right, we are flying through, we're doing well. So new service that we're going to talk about. So a new service that was added to all of the is in process of being added to all the waivers, and that is integrated community supports. So this is services that are provided up to 24 hours a day in a provider controlled setting. So it's not own home, it's provider controlled. So it's currently available on brain injury and CADI waivers. And then future addition to CAC and DD waivers will happen in 2023 is the hope. You know, and DHS plans for this, and they need to write the amendments, they need to coordinate with CMS. So the hope is that 2023 is when this will happen. So this is a new service, and it is to recognize that there are services that look like this, but it's not set up in this way. So you can read about the full service in the CBSM, Integrated Community Supports. And again, these are provider controlled settings where people live in their own living unit. So that's kind of the important thing. Living unit. So that means they have a bathroom and they have a kitchen and they have their own, you know, living space, and a bedroom, that they have all these pieces. So who does this impact? You know, who does this apply? It's a new service, so who's transitioning? So again, these are multifamily housing provider controlled units. So it could be apartment buildings, it could be the triplexes or the fourplexes or whatever size it might be. And it's controlled by the provider. And again, you have to look at own home language to learn that. What is provider controlled and versus what is own home. It also needs to comply with HCBS setting standards that are federal standards that Minnesota and all the states have had to work to make sure everything complies with. And it is a self-contained unit. So who this really impacts primarily is supported apartment programs that are out there. And the term supported apartment programs is something that's kind of been created and developed and that some providers are offering, but there was never a service, right, that was tied to supported apartment. There were other services that were defined and coming in, but we kind of layman's terms call them supported apartment programs. And then customized living also have the option of transitioning. So there are transitions for this, and the CBSM has a whole page dedicated on what does a transition look like for these types of settings. So supported apartment programs will be working towards that transition in line with the different waiver changes, because we noticed that the DD waiver, it's going to be later. It's not going to be right now, but other waivers can transition sooner. And then customized living programs have the option to transition. It's not required, but they might want to. So if it's a customized living that is only supporting people with elderly waiver funding, then it can continue as customized living. But if people that live in that customized living home are all on the brain injury or CADI, they could transition. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind if you're providing customized living or supported apartment programs. So again, you're going to want to read the CBSM on what's allowed, what's not allowed, what are the limitations, what are the requirements, what is the best fit for the people that live in that setting, and then also the provider kind of coordinating that. So those are all the services. We just went through all the new services just like that in 34 minutes. And again, we'll be handling questions at the end. Ketty's going to help navigate those with me. Okay, so some other changes just to highlight. You might be thinking, okay, so there are these new services. Well, what about all the other services that are available? So here I pulled just the 245D licensed waiver services. There are many other waiver services available, but these are the ones that are under 245D that are licensed. And there's no change. There's no name change. There's no Waiver Reimagine change to any of these, other than I did the asterisks for pre-vocational. So if you're providing homemaker, it's still homemaker. It's still that service. If you're providing night supervision, it's still night supervision. There's no change. But pre-vocational, again, we talked about that 3-year limit, and for people that are coming on new to pre-vocational services. All right, and the employment services, that's another thing. Those are new services that have been added over the last few years as we tease out what does day services look like and what do employment services look like for people that want community-based, competitively paid jobs. So those are all falling under that employment. All right, and then stepping away from 245D, there are some other waiver service changes that happen. So adult day, one thing to highlight, so people that are receiving adult day services, which is separate from day services, you can read that link to the CBSM. And new people that are coming on in 2021 need to be 55 years or older. If you have a current person that you're supporting, or maybe you're a case manager and they're younger than 55 and they've been receiving adult day for years, they can stay on. So they have the ability to stay on and be a part of it and continue to receive that service if they want, or they can transition to day services, or they can transition to employment if they want to. People, though, that are coming on brand new need to be 55 or older. Also, customized living. Customized living, new settings are limited to people age 55 and older. So those are new settings, and this is January 11th is the effective date for this. So again, you'll want to follow a CBSM page on customized living. It will provide you all information. They have a lot of great information. Housing access coordination. This is transitioning in June of 2021. So this year, it's becoming housing stabilization services. And that is going to be, it used to be just waiver available, and now it's going to become a medical assistance benefit to anyone that qualifies for medical assistance. So that is great to see that service is being expanded to get a broader group of people that probably could use that support. So it is to find and then also to keep housing. So housing stabilization services is the new name for that in June or July, I guess it ends in June. And then remote support. So many services currently allow remote support, and you can find that when you read the CBSM for each service. It talks about if remote is an option or not. So some of these were previously existing. Remote support was an option. We've had that COVID emergency, and we've got emergency approval for remote support to be provided in many, many different ways because of the COVID emergency. DHS was looking to get remote support added to many more services in a more permanent way, and that has not yet been approved. So the COVID emergency, I think, is supposed to expire, or that approval is supposed to expire at the end of March of 2021. So that's just a couple months from now. So we're going to pay attention to that and pay attention to if peacetime emergencies are being extended and if any of these other things are being extended. So you'll want to read down, and I've got a lot of links on this page, but you can see that there's a CBSM page devoted just to remote support. We have the summary of all changes for all the waivers. So if you click on that, and it will talk about all the different changes, and it really gets into details about remote support. Again, CBSM, I have that link here on the bottom right part of the screen, CBSM waiver programs. If you click on that, it brings you there, and you can navigate waiver by waiver. You can click on brain injury on the left-hand side of the screen, and then it'll show you all the services available on the brain injury waiver, and then you can click service by service to get to that page to learn all about that. And again, that streamlined service crosswalk, I have a link here on that page too, as that's just such a great resource to see everything at a glance. So those are hopefully, if anything from this presentation, you'll have an easy way to click to where you want to be and find information and find out details. Because again, today is an overview, Cliff Notes version to help you hopefully navigate the specifics that you need. All right, so provider logistics. So I'm a provider, and I provide SLS adult. And now I know that that's changing for people. So what do I need to do to get that new service? So really, what do you need to do as a provider? Technically nothing for most of these services. If you're already providing the service, and for enrollment and licensing, DHS automated many things that should automatically have changed for people's license and enrollment. And there's some exceptions, but we'll talk about that. So provider enrollment is is supposed to be automatically updated. So if you provided SLS, it should be community residential services. It should automatically switch. So if you provided family foster care, it should automatically switch in your enrollment for family residential. You should already have that on your enrollment record. For DHS licensing, the exact same thing. If you were providing ILS for someone on your enrollment and on your license, it should switch to individualized home supports with training, added both to your enrollment and both to licensing. And then those service agreements will be updated at the person's annual renewal, so their reassessment. So all these things are happening behind the scenes for providers, so that you know that you're going to be providing, if someone's annual meeting is in July and there's no service change, no provider change, when it hits July and they have their annual reassessment, it's at that time that their service is going to change to the new service. But it should already be, as a provider on your license, it should already be on your enrollment record. Of course, you can check to make sure you have this. So the MPSE provider portal is where you can go to log in and look at your enrollment record. So you can get to it through your minutes mailbox. And you might think, I never go into minutes. My billing person goes into minutes because that's where they bill. So you can have them add you as a user, or maybe you're already a user because you're the authorized administrator for it. But if you log in, and there's a hyperlink here at the bottom for minutes login, you can get into your account and you can look at your portal and be able to navigate through there. The second is just an overview. The second link at the bottom is an overview of the MPSE provider portal, and it provides information on how to use it and how to navigate it, all of that. And if you have questions around this, you want to call MHCP Provider Call Center. So that is a good resource to go and look at. For your 245D license, to see what does it say and what does it look like, you can go to DHS licensing lookup as one to see a public record of what that looks like. So the link to get to DHS licensing lookup is at the bottom of the screen. You click on that, you can type in your provider name and name. You can narrow the fields if you want to, but just by putting your provider name, it should be good. And you can look it up and you can see, what does my HCBS 245D license look like? And then what does any satellite sites or additional license I have, such as a CRS home or a day service setting, look like? So licensing lookup. And of course, you should have gotten your 245D license emailed to you from licensing at the end of 2020 for 2021. And you should see the new services there. So if you're not sure and you're confused, you can always contact your licensor. You can always call the DHS licensing help desk for that, just to verify and to make sure everything is ready. All right, so an example, Julie, you support Julie in your family foster care. She is on the DD waiver. She receives family SLS in your home because she's on the DD waiver. So when her annual meeting happens in February and she has her reassessment at that same month from MinChoices, the service agreement will switch to family residential services. So the case manager does that work. As a provider, your family residential services for adults should already be on your license and an enrollment. And then when you're going to go do your billing in minutes, you're going to use the new HCPC code for family foster care. And that's for this, for family foster care, it's now called family residential, and it's S5140UC. So you're going to use that. So again, that crosswalk of all waiver services talks about, what was the old HCPC code, what is the new HCPC code, and all those details. So you're going to want to reference all that. You'll see it on the new service agreement. So you're going to have all those pieces. And another example, Amber has a July annual meeting. She currently lives in her own apartment and she's receiving some ILS hours each week. And what happens for her is she is having her reassessment in July. She's not having any changes up until then. She's not changing providers. She's not changing services. So she's on the brain injury waiver. And when July hits and she has her reassessment, she's going to move from ILS to individualized home support with training. Her case manager will update her service agreement to be that new service, IHS with training. And again, if you provided ILS in the past, then you should have IHS on your enrollment and on your license, your 245D license. That automatically should have happened. Now, what you want to do, though, is you're going to want to update paperwork for her at that time to sit down with her and really talk with her in a person-centered way, getting all those really important things about her and everything that you know, to create the self-management assessment and looking at her ability to self-manage different parts of her life, the CSSP addendum intensive, the outcomes, making sure you have a schedule in place for progress reviews, and that annual meeting is occurring. You're going to then bill for IHS in minutes, and you're going to use those different HCPC codes based on what she's receiving. So there is a daily unit, and then there are 15 minutes for one-on-one, one-on-one remote, and 1-2. So you're going to want to use the right HCPC code for the situation, and that matches the service agreement. All right. So those are very, very simple examples just to kind of lay out as a provider, what does it look like? What could you expect? What do you need to do? So the biggest change again is ILS that is becoming an intensive service, and you need to follow that intensive service paperwork, making sure you have all that in place. Okay, so that to-do, that ILS, I talked about that, and minutes billing, make sure you're reviewing service agreements that you get, that they're correct and accurate, they have the right HCPC code, and that you're using that when you go to bill. What if you want to add a service? So I just talked about all these services and you think, boy, we've only provided homemaker in the past. And now I'm learning about all these other things that I feel that as our agency, we could do this and we could do a great job. We'd love to do it. So if you want to add services and you already have a 245D license and you're already enrolled with MHCP, then you need to contact. So usually if it's a 245D license service, best bet is to first contact your 245D licensor, ask them, there's a form that they will send for you to add new services to your license. So you can call your licensor, you can email your licensor. If you don't know who your licensor is, you can call the help desk, and that phone number is right there. So we always think of DHS as one thing, or I oftentimes think of DHS as one thing, DHS. And really DHS is huge. There are so many people in so many different departments. And licensing is one team. And then you have enrollment, which is a separate group of people, a separate team, and they don't automatically update each other. So you can't just call your licensor and be done. You need to also then talk to and communicate with enrollment. And again, enrollment, to make updates there, you go through the MPSE portal where you can add services through that route, or you can do the old school way and fax, and you can use the HCBS program service request form. So I have links for both. I have links to that portal, and then I have links to their portal information. That's that first maroon thing. And then the second maroon one is the HCBS program service request form. So you already have enrollment with DHS. Usually you want your 245D license updated and current, because then when you go to enrollment and you want to get that added as an enrolled service, whatever it might be, you want to make sure that you're sending a copy of your updated 245D license to show, yes, indeed, we have this now added to our license. So usually you're working with licensing first to get it added to your license, then you're contacting enrollment, showing evidence. And if you don't send in your license or they're not requesting it, then they're looking and checking. Do you have this added to your license? Are you qualified to provide this? Some services, you need to have assurance statements or other things that you have to send in as evidence and proof that you understand your responsibilities and what needs to be done. So there might be other qualifications that you have to submit to enrollment to show it's beyond the 245D license. There might be other things they're requesting. So there's all that. If you want help with any of that, our consultants do help people try to navigate some of these pieces. Licensing seems a little more straightforward and simple. The enrollment, because enrollment covers so many different services, way beyond waiver services or so much, it's a little more complex and complicated. But with the portal, hopefully that will be easier for providers as we move forward, because then we'll be able to see, as a provider, you'll be able to see on your screen what enrollment is seen on their side. It used to be that you would call and they would try to explain and talk through what they were seeing in the screen, but you never had access to it. Now we have access, at least. So faxing is an option, or the portal is an option for that. All right, so that is everything that's happening, or so much work has gone into place to get up to this point and to be able to roll this all out. And that's what's happened in this last year. And now, as we see, as services transition moving in through this year, we'll see services starting to move. So by the end of 2021 and going into those first few weeks of January 2022, for those other waivers that had a delayed approval, we're going to see all those transitions. So all family foster care, all corporate foster care or corporate SLS, all day DTH and structured day, all that's switching, all ILS by January 12th of 2022, everyone should have made the switch. Everything should be done. And that is phase 1. And that is what is again happening in 2021. So phase 2, DHS is still working and doing a ton of work to get all these things in place. And again, they're communicating with federal government and at the Minnesota state level for getting statute and the different things in place. And it's still in progress. So phase 1 is going to be happening this year. Phase 2, simplifying the waivers. So this is another big change that will be happening. And again, this is 2022 and beyond, and they have to coordinate with the legislature this year and next year and moving on. But really, instead of having the 4 waivers and it being based on diagnosis, they're looking to change that and really look at people get services based on their needs, not their diagnosis. People get waivers based on kind of where they live. So there's a residential support waiver. There's one waiver that will be developed, and then the other is individual support waiver. So residential support waiver is going to be services that people live in a licensed home. Individual support waiver are people that are not living in a licensed home. So that is the proposed change. Again, it still has to go through federal and state, a lot of pieces to happen federally and at the state level to make all that happen. But that is the proposed second phase that is being done. They're also looking at that service planning tool. So we're really trying to encourage all people that receive supports to have the information they need of what services are available to them, what services are the best fit for them, and then also how do they afford it and how do they use their authorized services and funding to make the best match for them. So that gets into the service planning tool and individual budget methodology. So those are some pieces that are coming in 2022 and later 2023. It takes a long time, right? We all know, and so when I think back to the common service menu we were all hoping for back in probably 2004, it takes us a long time. Systems are complex and they take a while to get everything coordinated. All right, some resources. Again, tons of hyperlinks already included in today's presentation, and then some more coming through. So the Waiver Reimagine website is a great place to go. They have frequently asked questions on there, really good for, and that is going to be probably the best place to go for information. So they have 2 different frequently asked questions on that website. One just general frequently asked questions, and another one based on frameworks and all the different things that are happening. The crosswalk, which I know I've had other links to throughout the presentation, the CBSM, and I wanted to get all this stuff kind of written out for you instead of a hyperlink if someone just got, for some reason, a printed copy of today's handouts. But again, their electronic copy was in the email. It's in the chat. You can go ahead and grab that. You probably want to save that so that you have all these hyperlinks. Rate limits. Sometimes that's a great thing that people want to know. What are the rate limits for the different services that are not part of the framework? And then the actual framework. So what does 2021 frameworks work for the DWRS? So those are those links. So DHS had some webinars that they offered on all of this, and you want to go to the training archive and you click on that, you're able to look through. They have the presentations, you can get the handouts, and you can look at the slides, and then you can listen. You call in to a phone number and you listen. Now they were presenting a lot of information. They were presenting before they had final word from the CMS. So some things that they were presenting, such as some of the remote support stuff, that didn't get approved by CMS, that had to come out. So some of that information was from October and earlier when they really were hoping that everything would go through, and it didn't. So look, most of the information is what actually happened, a little bit of pieces that didn't happen. And then eList, if you are not part of eList and getting those email updates, really good to get that. And I linked where to go and sign up and get that information, and the archives where you can read through all the old ones. And then the 2 to really pay attention to is the one that came out on December 28th for brain injury, CAC, and DD waivers. And then it was all clear that all these changes could occur. And then, as we mentioned before, the CADI waiver, the approval didn't come through until the 11th. It's January 11th. And that announcement came out on the 11th saying that these things are all now clear, that these new services are authorized and allowed. All right. DHS has a great place to connect and get resources. So Waiver Reimagine FAQ, I put that link right there. It's on that Waiver Reimagine page, but if you want to just get right to the frequently asked questions, that's that first link. Frequently asked questions around the DWRS implementation. That's a second link, also really, really helpful, really good to look at. DHS has a dedicated email for all of this. So waiver.reimagine@state.MNUS is a place to email questions that you are having about a service, about a specific situation or a specific scenario that you're having with someone and that you're unsure. And then if you have questions about, we talked about some changes with customized living and pre-vocational and things like that, you want to talk about, or limits, you can email that to hcbs.settings@state.MNUS. So follow all those as resources and ways to continue. All right, we're going to go through questions. I know Ketty's kind of getting those organized and ready as she pulls those together. Just a real quick thing. We talked about HCBS settings, and we just want to highlight STAR is doing a contract with DHS to do free consulting for HCBS providers that have a setting. So it has to be a licensed home, it can't be services in someone's own home, a licensed day program, a licensed customized living, you know, those kind of settings. It can't be for your ILS program or whatever it might be. But free consulting and training, free customized support around not compliance and 245D. We can't help with that, but we can help with person-centered services and organization and all of that. And then we have some slides here also. We have a great supervisory package of training available monthly. It is deeply discounted, as we know that there are so many new managers out there that could use support and be part of a group of learning best practices as you lead and manage and supervise people in social services. So you can learn more there. And then we have some just upcoming classes. As I said, we have so many classes on compliance and person-centered. We'd love to help with that. And you can register for any of those at our calendar on that link. All right, so questions. Ketty's going to jump on here and ask questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer. And if you have to go, that is just fine. We understand all your questions should be answered by all the resources that we've provided so far in today's training.
Okay, yes, we do have a bunch of questions here, Angie. So first of all, will there be any exception for clients who have had their service agreement expire during COVID and have not returned for services yet?
You know, I would say I don't believe there are any exceptions. I believe as people maybe are requesting to come back to services and their service agreement has expired and maybe they moved home during COVID, you want to be talking with the case manager. You want to probably be calling your licensor, your 245D licensor, to talk about what should we do in this situation. You know, how long should we extend services? But is a person, some of the questions to come in is, has their waiver, have they gone off the waiver because services have gone delayed so long? You know, those are some things to factor in. But if they're still on the waiver, there was just no services being delivered, but they're still on the waiver, when they come back, it would still be whatever service they were at until their reassessment date. But if for whatever reason they exited the waiver and then wanted to come back and were re-entering the waiver, and that service was changing, then that service would change at that time. So I hope that answers.
Okay, so if our annual meeting schedule is different from the case manager's reassessment date, does the rolling implementation follow the service agreement renewal or our calendar? What if the team meets 1 to 2 months before the service agreement renews?
Great question. So the timeline for the service change is with the reassessment. So it comes with the reassessment date and the new service agreement. That is the new services being delivered upon that date. So you're right. Your team meeting and annual paperwork as a provider might be different, but you're going to want to make sure that things are in place by that service agreement date. I have not heard any formal word or announcement from licensing and how they're going to be looking at ILS as it switches to IHS with training in an intensive service. So you could contact your licensor, which might be a great first step to clarify. But if we look at what does statute say and what are the requirements, it would be that when that new service starts, that the provider has the new service pieces in place or getting in place. You know, DHS is usually, when they're looking to see, oh, I see you didn't have it here, but you did identify you needed it and you got it started here. That's great. You self-corrected. So you want to, when the new service agreement is issued and that's the new service you're delivering, you want to be technically compliant. So you could be talking with the team and doing paperwork before the meeting, or well before the service starts. If the team meeting's like ahead of that service agreement change, you could start pulling all that paperwork together and get all those authorizations and conversations occurring, so you're prepared.
Okay, is the 6790 form changing?
67, you want to always make sure you have the most current, and I am not as familiar with those details because you're putting new service names in there, but all of the new services are using existing frameworks for DWRS. You just want to make sure you're using the right framework for the right service. So I am not an expert on 6790s, so I don't want to answer in further detail around that. But you want to make sure you're pulling, always looking that you have the most current copy, which I don't know when the last published date was off the top of my head, and then also making sure you're using the right framework for the new service.
And the 6790 did change in 2021.
Thanks,
We just
Ken.
got confirmation.
Thank you.
If a service does not appear on the crosswalk, such as ICLS, can we assume that it remains unchanged?
Yes, that is, yep. If you don't see a service on the crosswalk, it is because it did not change. Yep.
Okay. Is staff training still the same for basic and intensive services?
Yep. So 245D used to have all these different differences. Right now, all training is the same. Basic and intensive have to follow the same topics of what's required, and the hours went away for orientation and annual training. There's no minimum, although positive supports rule requires 8 hours of orientation training for direct care staff, and then management and above have the 8+ additional training that they have to take as far as their function specific responsibilities. So times are all connected to positive supports rule in that language. Orientation and annual training is not minimum is required. One thing to note though is 245D, while there's not a minimum number of hours required, it does say that for every topic that's addressed under 245D for training requirements, that you include the instructor name and the number of hours provided. So you still have to keep track of how many hours, even though you don't have to hit a certain minimum, except for PSR, positive supports rule.
Okay, so are any of the STAR services forms changing?
Great question. So STAR, since legislation has not changed around any of this, STAR's full set of forms and policies are all compliant to 2020 standards. And again, all the forms are available. If you bought either the basic set or the intensive, you have all the forms available. So for ILS, as you transition to an intensive service, you're going to want to pull that outcomes form, and you're going to want to pull our self-management assessment form and use those for people that you probably have not used in the past for ILS. And the progress review and annual team meeting, all of those things. So everything should be right there in your set if you've purchased the STAR set. And none of those forms changed because of Waiver Reimagine. They've changed because of legislation last year.
So are there any CSSP addendum updates this year with this change?
Because of Waiver Reimagine, no. Again, the CSSP addendum, you're going to want to switch to use the CSSP addendum for intensive for people that are going from ILS to IHS. And you'll want to use the intensive version. There were changes this last year, but it wasn't anything to do with Waiver Reimagine. It had to do with having to talk about employment and talking about people moving if they're living in a provider kind of controlled setting, making sure that people are aware of their options, that they have choices. There's been changes throughout the years. We've had to have conversations about technology and how does technology help people reach their outcomes. That was a change for a few years ago. So those are all things that have been updated in our forms, but that wasn't Waiver Reimagine. That was all just statute changes.
And then a follow-up to an earlier question. So if we were following the service agreement for changes and we met 2 months earlier, do we then need to meet again 2 months later to change the paperwork on our end?
Great question. So service agreement has now changed and you realize, oh my goodness, we met 2 months ago. We didn't do any of this intensive paperwork. And now we have to do intensive paperwork. You don't need to meet as a team. You're not required to meet, but you are required to develop the paperwork in consultation and work with the case manager and for sure the person and for sure any of the team members they have involved in their life, including legal representation. So this could be conversations, phone calls. This could be emails back and forth in a secure way so that they're encrypted and not able to be released and break HIPAA. So you can do the work and then you can get authorizations through that way. You don't have to pull the team together for a physical or video meeting. It could be all done otherwise. You can explain to the team, hey, the service has now changed because of Waiver Reimagine. We have a little bit more paperwork and responsibilities. This is the draft of what we've come with as we've talked to the person receiving services. We'd love your input and review and approval.
Okay, so I noticed that respite services are not part of Waiver Reimagine. Are there settings where a provider could still be licensed to provide multiple services out of one setting? In particular, could a 24-hour residential adult corporate foster care home also be licensed to provide respite services?
This is the time that I would always go to the CBSM. If a customer was calling us with this question, I always pull up the CBSM and I would pull to see what settings are allowed. And so without being able to do all that digging around, I don't want to give an answer, but yes, things can be, services can be licensed. There are some services that can and cannot be provided in certain settings. So you're going to always want to look at, but you want to look at the service. So you're going to look up respite, and you're going to look on the CBSM for that page, and you're going to read through. I don't want to commit because I am horrible memory, and off the top of my head, I don't know that. But we could figure that answer out by digging into the CBSM, reviewing each service like respite, and where can it be applied, or delivered or provided, what settings. So I would recommend you go that route. There really is no licensing change or requirement change of services other than what we talked about, customized livings changing and support department programs changing. Those are really the big setting changes of a different license or different service being required or option to transition.
Will we need to complete a new intake when the service changes?
Good question. You don't need to do a new intake. The service is changing. You're not adding a new service, it's transitioning. So that's important. So if you had ILS and you're transitioning to IHS, you don't need to do a new intake. You want to update paperwork though to reflect the service, and again, do all the new intensive paperwork to make sure you have that in place. Or if it's family foster care and now it's becoming, family residential, you're gonna don't need to do all the intake requirements in a 45-day meeting. That's not required because it's a service change. Now, if through this though you had been providing homemaker to a person or some service, and now you're deciding, hey, let's add on IHS or let's add on employment. We want to provide employment services to you or whatever, or you're choosing us, right? People have the power and the choice. They're choosing you. They say, I want you to provide employment service or whatever it might be. You do new intake paperwork for that. So when you add a new service that you weren't delivering before, but if it's transitioning from one to the other, no new intake is needed.
Do I have to use the new code for billing if I have an old service agreement with the old code?
So if your current service agreement is current, and so when we say old, it's a current one and it's current dates, and you have the old code because they haven't transitioned, that is what you're going to continue to use as a provider. That's what you're going to bill off of until that reassessment date, until that new service agreement is issued with the new code and the new service. That's when you transition to the new.
Can I bill for the time it takes to change the paperwork on any and all waivers?
So there is some services allow billing for indirect time. And I, again, off the top of my head, do not know. So that's what you're going to want to review in that CBSM is where you're going to find the information around that. You're going to be able to review service by service, and also for indirect time is the language to use for that. Some services it is allowed. Some services, it's included in the rate, so you know that administrative time is part of what's built into your rate. So it really depends, and I can't speak specifically to any one service. This is where I really rely on the CBSM to read through that.
Do you know which services will eventually require electronic visit verification?
Oh, great question. So electronic visit verification, EVV, is coming up, and it's going to be in place some point. And I, off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I do not know, but I know that DHS has an entire page, web page devoted to this. So if you Google MN-DHS electronic visit verification, it will pull up that page. It should be one of the first results. You click on that, it lists all the services that will be required. And again, electronic visit verification isn't a Minnesota requirement, it's a federal government requirement that's happening. So as Minnesota is trying to comply with the federal government and CMS and the funding there, and trying to get things in place, So that's where you're going to want to go. And most of those services, the way I kind of categorize in my head, are these services that are being delivered in a person's own home, where they're authorized and proving, yes, you came, you actually showed up, you delivered this service and you left. But not all, and that's the thing, is I don't have that list memorized. But if you go to that webpage, again, I am always on my computer, always Googling and searching these different references for all those services.
Okay, so if the individual annual meeting with the provider is different from the min-choice assessment renewal, can the provider become paperwork compliant at their annual meeting for ILS services that now require intensive service planning?
That is a great question. I think it comes what comes first, right? Because you want to technically, when the service changes, the reassessment changes and the service agreement is updated to the new service, and if it becomes an intensive service, so really the only one we're talking about is ILS switching to IHS with training, you're going to technically, if you're just looking at paper and what does statute say, when you deliver that service, it is supposed to be compliant. So if that service agreement is issued a month or 2 months before the annual team meeting, technically you'd want that paperwork beforehand. Now, I have not heard a word from DHS licensing on how they're going to look at records and what their expectations are. So it might be worth talking to your licensor to see, or you might just say, well, let's just get it done and get it ready. Send drafts out to the team and say, this is what we've come up with. Can you give your feedback and approval? And we'll get this in place now, and then we'll rediscuss at the annual team meeting coming up in a month to make sure everything's accurate.
So for agencies that have housing with services sites, but fill out the customized living 6790 for service agreements, do these changes affect those services?
All right, so housing with service license sites that are providing customized living to people, that's a service you're billing. It really comes down, if you want to transition to the new service, who you're supporting. If it's everyone on the elderly waiver, you stay on as a customized living. If you're serving people on the other waivers that are transitioning, you have an option. You have an option to transition. So it's really going back to that transition link that's on that slide that we talked about. Follow that and look through that to see, you know, what is going to be the best fit. And the transition is outlined really well. They did a really good job of outlining who has to transition and who has the option to transition and who can't transition, such as the elderly waiver.
Can you talk about how this will affect CDCS?
Great question. So CDCS is still a service, still an option. Waiver Reimagine did not affect or do that. Some of the language, as we talk about individual budgeting methodology, that sounds like CDCS because that's how CDCS manages. They're actually two separate processes, and it's going to be two different ways. So CDCS is kind of its own service and is continuing to be offered and is not currently being touched by any of these changes.
Is there a daily rate for integrated community support, just as there is for customized living?
I would say you got to click, again, you're going to see how bad I am. I'm really good at looking up information. I'm really bad at memorizing information. So you're going to want to click onto that CBSM page for the service and to read through. And then the other resource that you're going to want to follow is the DWRS, because that's going to tell you that crosswalk page that we talked about, that crosswalk link. It'll tell you what was for that new service. It'll tell you what frameworks you can use and what different ratios you can use, and if there's a daily rate or not. I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head.
Will there be a shortage of integrated community support providers because of clients transferring from customized living services?
So will there be a shortage? Well, the provider themselves that were providing customized living could also provide that, you know, or could transition to this, so that would be new. Other agencies might want to start that service, and if that's the case, they do have to go through the process of getting that. There's a settings report required, and there's some different steps involved to get that added as a new option. I don't think there's any intention to limit or reduce. This is a service that's being provided that many providers can transition to.
Are you sure about that training hours requirement that you brought up earlier? I have a self-monitoring checklist dated 8/20 stating that minimum staff annual training hours are required.
So the self-monitoring checklist that someone might be referencing, if it's saying, I don't have the DHS self-monitoring, so that's a link that you can find on the DHS licensing. They have self-monitoring checklists, which are great for you to use as an auditing tool to make sure your stuff is compliant. Yeah, check the date for sure. You want to make sure. So when it talks about minimum hours, again, we're talking about the positive supports rule that the 245D licensor is looking to see. So again, that 8-hour training for direct care staff and anyone that's doing the roles that are required of that 8-hour training. And then the function specific training for management and higher, that 4-hour and 2-hour trainings that are required. And those are the hours that are around that. But for orientation and annual training, there is not hourly requirements.
Are we able to bill for travel time with the new waiver?
So travel time, there is a waiver code for transportation if you're providing transportation, and that's what you would bill if you're meeting and delivering that service to someone. And as far as billing for travel time, again, you're going to want to look service by service, what is allowed, what's not allowed. And that CBSM is your rule book, right? That's what you go to look and see service by service, what's allowed, what's not allowed. Are you transporting someone, and if so, are you billing waiver transportation? Or doing other services around that, or is this just staff driving to and from different locations to provide support? And then that's a different answer probably based on the CBSM for the service.
Do you need a 245D waiver to provide integrated community support or housing with services license, just as customized living services?
Okay, so I can answer the new housing access services. Can you say the two services again?
It was integrated community support or housing with services.
Okay, thank you. So housing with services, as people transition, integrated community support is a 245D licensed service. So you will need a 245D. Housing with services, housing with services is funded in multiple different ways. When it's under the waiver, it's called customized living. And that is the service that can continue on as customized living. And there's different ways you can be licensed to provide that service. Or if you're transitioning to the new service, that's a 245D licensed as well. And I'm going off memory, and I really, really want to look that up right now, but I can't. So, but integrated community is intended to be 245D licensed.
If you provide multiple services for the same individual, could you use one SMA, CSSP addendum, and outcome methods instead of duplicating all these documents?
So if you're finding that you're providing multiple services, I'm going to handle each document on its own. So if you're providing employment services to someone and ILS that's transitioning to IHS, the goals around IHS might be around banking or grocery shopping or making friends in the community or whatever it might be. So your outcome is going to be tailored to that and what the person wants to develop and learn in that service. And then employment is going to be different, right? You're going to be whatever stage they're at. Are they searching for a job? Are they trying to learn what they're good at, what they're interested in? Are they trying to apply for jobs and get ready for that? Your outcome is going to be tailored to that. So you're going to have separate outcomes based on the service. Self-management assessments and other documentations, you're going to want to have enough information. Self-management, I think, is something that probably could be used across different services. If they're able to manage their medications at home, they're also able to manage maybe their medications while they're in the community and out and about. So that might be more of a universal document that could be used. When we talk about the addendum, STAR created one form to hit all the boxes of what an addendum requires. If you think about, I always think of what is easiest for the person and what is easiest for that direct care staff that's doing that work. So if the direct care staff is only providing IHS with training, it might be really confusing for them to read all the addendum pieces about employment, because then they're confused about what is my role versus what's the employment staff's role. So it might make sense to separate those things out. But maybe it's the same staff is hired to provide IHS with training and also employment supports, and they meet all the qualifications to provide both services. And maybe it works and makes sense to be all in one addendum. So again, STAR created this one addendum to kind of cover everything so that providers know they captured everything that needed to be discussed. But it really is just making sure all these little pieces in the person's file is there, and that the staff that are providing the services know what pieces are theirs. But you want to be really clear, and you would want to talk about, what are someone's preferences, and that's included and required in the addendum. Preference for service delivery and things like that. Well, their preference for when they receive their IHS support with training versus when they receive employment might be very, very different. They might need help with banking every Friday, but employment they want to work on Mondays and Tuesdays, at the beginning of the week, whatever it might be. So really, always, we want to, what does a person want? What paperwork makes sense for them? And how do we make those direct care staff jobs the easiest it can be, so they can focus on really good support and services?
Who schedules the annual meeting?
Annual meetings. So annual meetings are, who schedules? It's a great question. So when we talk about the team coming together for an annual meeting, providers need to keep track of it and be aware, because each annual month, so if the annual meeting was in January of 2020, you're going to want to have it before the end of January 2021. So providers kind of have to be aware of these annual meetings, and oftentimes they're the ones that are prompting it. So if you are a residential provider, oftentimes you take the lead and you coordinate with maybe the day service provider. When will this work? And talk to the case manager, but you're always including the person, asking their preference. But it really is a conversation of, we have families with parents that are snowbirds, and so they really want that annual meeting in the summer when they're up here in Minnesota. And so you're coordinating with a lot of different people. But as a provider, it's your job and responsibility to keep track of when it is and when it should be happening, and have those conversations. But the person ultimately is in control of when they want the team to come together. And if they say, hey, I know I'm supposed to have my annual meeting in January, but I still want to gather as a group, but I still don't feel comfortable with COVID, let's delay the annual meeting until May, when maybe they feel that everyone will be vaccinated on their team, or whatever it might be. So document that, the person's choice, the person's desire was that, but you want to get paperwork kind of updated. Say, well, good, we'll have those conversations, we'll pull together as a team. In the meantime, there are certain authorizations that we need to get updated. And don't ask me which ones off the top of my head, I don't know. I have to read 245D.
Your slide on the 245D intensive support services standards didn't list the IAPP. Is that still required?
Great question. IAPP, Individual Abuse Prevention Plan, is a document that's required for anyone. So basic services. That's why it's not on that intensive 245D.071 link, because that is just covering on that link the additional paperwork. But the Individual Abuse Prevention Plan is required for everyone, basic services and intensive, because that's a requirement under the Vulnerable Adult Act and Maltreatment of Minors Act, which covers everybody.
In response to one question that you answered live, we use one set of combined forms for our services and the DAC, which is a separate agency. We just make sure to note all the information for both agencies on all the forms, and case managers and licensors have liked this sharing of the forms. Most of the information is about the person and is true in all settings. Both agencies subscribe to the STAR forms and policies, and we've modified them for this purpose. So just a
good.
comment.
Partnership, and as long as it's specific enough and detailed enough to each setting, it works.
Where can I find information to comprehend the breakdowns and specifics for cost reporting so that I don't overlap with GRH and et cetera?
Cost reporting. So I'm assuming this is the question of, DHS is now doing DWRS framework cost reporting as a requirement for providers. If you want financial consultation on that, we do have some finance people on our team that could help with that. So if you just emailed support@starsvcs.com, we could connect you, or if you replied to the email that got you this link to this class, we can get you in touch with one of our financial consultants, and they can consult with you and kind of talk to you about what should or shouldn't be reported and how to report it.
For the next question,
sorry, the DWRS website might be a really good, they really try to give a good breakdown. So try to figure it out for free first. But we do have financial consultants available if you want further help.
Okay, so we had this question come up quite a few times, and that was for individualized home supports, is there a specific way to bill for a sleepover nights? And there was an interesting conversation with case managers about this in the chat. And what came from them is that they've been troubleshooting this with case managers or supervisors and the Waiver Reimagine team for weeks. There is not currently a service option for individuals who need sleep staff in their own home, because night supervision requires awake staff, and DHS has stated directly that 24-hour emergency was not intended to be provided by staff on site. So, this might be something that people want to continue mentioning, so more people get behind it for a push to create a service option for this.
And get an answer. And again, I think, there's a lot of creativity in trying to provide support to people as we had moratorium on the development of new corporate sites. And that was one thing that maybe made a lot of changes in our system. But a lot of people have wanted to find a different living situation than a corporate group home or a family foster care home. And a lot of creativity came around that. And this is a question mark still, right? We're trying to figure out, how does someone that is receiving support in their own home and had a sleep overnight, what does that look like now? And it continue to work with Waiver Reimagine. So that is the goal is not that anyone would be lacking or missing services, but I think it's trying to piece together what is that. And I think they really need to talk about each person and each specifically, what are their needs? Why are they having a sleep overnight versus something else, such as 24-hour emergency support or technology or something else, that assistive technology or something else that's available in the waivers. And then I think if they realize there's a gap in what's out there and available, a solution has to come, right? So they'll have to figure it out. And that's something to continue to bring those specific scenarios and situations up and talk through what should we authorize, what should we do. I have not seen anything in writing with directions on what that magic package is. And really it isn't. It's not a magic package because each person is individual and we want to find the right services for that person. So I'm sure there was a lot of chatter for case managers, and I'm sorry I don't have an answer other than Waiver Reimagine team is the one that you really want to continue to communicate with.
For IHS training or with training, do outcomes need to be formally charted?
So the question, IHS with training or family training are both intensive, and yes, you do need to have a formal outcome written that meets all of the outcome requirements of 245D, which are pretty simple, and you do want to track them in a formal way. And tracking can be fun. I mean, I think of the ways we tracked outcomes when I first started in this field 27 years ago, and they were so clinical and they were so, but really, hopefully these are things people want in their life that they are working towards, and hopefully we're tracking them in a creative way. When I teach outcomes, I love, like, people should be excited about this stuff, and it should be something that resonates with them. And we see all sorts of people that use planners day to day, and they have drawings or doodlings or stickers or whatever. And you look at those planners that are very popular now, and go to Target and you'll see all these stickers and you're like, oh, stickers. But people get excited. It's motivating or whatever. And it's for adults. This is not child. This is for adults. So there are creative ways that we can see progress. And for some people, it's if they're saving money for a vacation someday when it's free to travel or safe to travel, it's looking in the bank account and reporting, I've got this much in my bank account, I'm getting it, I'm getting there where I need to be to afford this trip, whatever it might be. But yes, you do need to document. You do need to be able to show it happened and that you're making progress. It could be pictures too. Like someone wants to learn how to do art. You could take pictures of their progress of creating art and sending that to the team. That could be documentation of their success and their progress along the way.
Do you provide consultation services to help an organization determine which services to enroll in?
Yes, we do have consultants available. I would recommend, and yes, you can hire us to do that, recommend really figuring out what are you and your staff qualified for and good to do and able to do. Read the CBSM to understand services, and then maybe connect with a consultant to get finalized questions answered. But yes, we can talk through what are some of the requirements or qualifications for each service. But really, the consultant is going to pull out that CBSM and work through it with you. So I got great consultants, but I don't think they have them all memorized.
Is the rate different for IHS with training and without training?
That's a great question. And I am so program focused that I don't know rates. So I don't know. But IHS is a framework rate. So it's set up based on the needs of the person and the frameworks that you're putting out with those 6790s. So I would assume for each person it's going to vary, and for each service it's going to vary.
Do you know when billing is going to be available for these through RMS?
So all of these RMS should be updated and ready to go. And all services, I know there were some errors or edits that were popping up, and a lot of them have been resolved. There might be a few that they're still working through, and there's directions in the links that we sent out. When you read through some of these links, it'll talk about where the DHS is saying we're seeing these edits, these have been resolved, these are still there, and a way to push through the one I think that's still lingering. But RMS should be updated and ready to go.
Do time cards need to be revised to reflect the new service names? Do we need to have different time cards for each service?
Okay, so time cards. So so time cards are tricky just because you have requirements as an employer and documenting time of your employees. And then you also have requirements of your documentation for evidence of what service was delivered, when, and by who. And so sometimes time cards are used in that way. And if that's how you're capturing, then you want to make sure you're updating service names, time in, time out for each service, that you're only billing IHS for the IHS time, and you're only billing the employment services or the homemaker for the homemaker or employments, that everything is really unique. So some people might have one system where this documentation works as the employee's time card, and that's what they get paid off of. And also it's what you pull information out of for billing. If that's that system, then you want to probably update service names. Other people, the employee does their time card, and that's just their time card for pay and employment reasons. And then they're also documenting other places to show the time and start of service delivery of what service it was. And there are Minnesota Statute 256B is where you go to find out what are all the things that you have to have for documentation for service delivery. And for like the unit-based services, you need AM and PM start and finish times. You need the service name, you need the signature of the person providing the service and what service it was. So you want to make sure you reference all those different things. There's a lot, and you might have it all in one form, or you might be using multiple methods, but I would recommend updating service names as people transition.
Do you know why there's not an RMS worksheet for unit-based services? Case managers are continually asking us for a 6790 for services that do not fit on the current 6790.
So this is out of my realm. If you're having difficulty, so any framework that you need to be calculating, there should be an appropriate form to make those calculations. But I do not know the specifics on that. I apologize. If you have questions around that specifically and you want financial consultation, our financial team is amazing. And I know they could answer this off the top of their head and would be able to help you out. So you can reply to this email, or you can email support@starsvcs.com if you have a question around that.
For the new IHS without training, it states you can only bill up to 16 hours of service per day. Is that per worker per day or total for all workers for the day?
I would say it's people receiving that. For the person receiving support, the person receiving support has whatever that limit is. So whether that's 2 people that come in to provide that service, maybe one's coming in the morning and then one's coming in the afternoon, it's companion that's switching to IHS without training. And you have one staff in the morning, one in the later on in the day. So it's 2 staff, but you want to make sure the total is whatever limit there is for the person. The limits are around the person receiving the service.
Will people still need a habilitation service to qualify for some other services? For example, we support a person receiving personal support from us and vocational services from another provider. Several years ago, we had to add an IHFS for a few hours a week for required habilitation service. So if a person transitions to IHS without training, do they need the training component in another way?
All right, so really good details in that question. I know the habilitation service is still required, and DHS, in all those links that we covered and hyperlinked, they have the list of what services still meet the habilitation service requirement. So you're going to want to reference that, because I don't have that memorized. I apologize. But if you look through Waiver Reimagine and what services still follow habilitation, I believe the requirement's still there, because they're still distinguishing these are the services that qualify as habilitation for the DD. And this is only the DD waiver, I believe, that requirement is part of.
So we've started the new employment services, but are having trouble billing for the new day supports and pre-vocational services, as we need to know what the place of service code should be in minutes.
Okay. Oh, you guys have these great finance questions, and I'm wishing I had one of our finance team on. I don't do anything with billing, and I'm sorry, I don't have the answer. So submit that through either this email or through support@starsvcs.com, and we will see if we can get an answer to you on that, because I, as you can see, I know program, or at least I know where to look up program. I do not know our billing side.
And Brian would love to answer those questions, I'm sure.
You're fabulous.
We have individuals choosing the DAC in-house employment. How will that look under the new waivers?
Okay, so DT&H services used to be a service where people could do employment, and employment is really being broken out. So day services, and you got to, again, link to the CBSM page on day services and look at what does that look like and what is included in that service. And you're going to see anything that's employment based is moving to employment services. So you're going to want to see that you're probably going to need to add employment as services and distinguish how those services are delivered, and make sure you're following those employment services in the location they're allowed to be, and what does that look like. So you're going to want to, again, CBSM is your go-to rule book of reading through what is allowed during the day service time that I'm billing for day services, what is allowed for employment services under the 3 different employment service categories, employment development and the other 2, and what can we do and where can we do that, are things to kind of tease out. And I would say if you are, not a member of MOHR, MOHR, which is a lot of the day service providers, that's a great place to connect with other day service providers and talk through some of those scenarios, because I know they've really been tackling a lot of that as we've seen changes through the waivers.
Does the 3-year limit on pre-vocational services only apply to people newly admitted to programs, or people who were previously receiving DT&H services now have the pre-vocational services included in this also?
So if someone was previously receiving pre-vocational, they can continue the pre-vocational without the 3-year limit. It's new people coming on to pre-vocational that will have the 3-year limit. So again, they have to have already been receiving before January 1st pre-vocational services in order to not have to meet that 3-year limit. So again, if you have questions around that, it's that email on that slide that I said, go talk to them if you have policy limit questions around that. That's the email to contact for the right people at DHS.
If you're currently licensed as an adult day program, in order to provide service to a new person under 55, do you need to apply for licensure as a day support services provider?
Great question. Yep. So if you are an adult day provider and you want to open up, so there's adult day, kind of we used to call adult daycare or adult day services. Again, the limit is now people 55 and older for new people coming in. And if you want to provide services to new people coming in that are under 55, you would need that day service 245D license. So you're going to have adult day as your one license, adult day license. And then you're going to also, if you want to serve people under 55 and provide day services, but again, you have to look at all the requirements of HCBS settings and the CBSM requirements for both adult day and day service for people under 55 and comply with all of that.
If pre-vocational is a new service, do you have to do the 45-day meeting, etc.?
So pre-vocational is a intensive service for 245D, and so you would have to follow the requirements for a 40 admission, 45-day, all of the paperwork for intensive. Yep. And the 45-day, they changed that. It's 45 service days or 60 calendar days. So you have to count that out to see which you hit first and which timeline you should follow.
Okay, so day support services location of services states that some skills can be taught in a facility-based setting. However, the provider must also teach, develop, and support these skills in the community. How is some defined? How often do we have to be in the community? What if our facility doesn't have the resources to do this? Will clients just not be able to come here?
So great question. And this is really the big picture behind the scenes around community-based is around the HCBS setting. So it's federal standards that in order for the state of Minnesota to get federal money and to be paid to help support these services, they need to comply. And the HCBS setting is that nothing can be isolating. So when people go to a place and that's all that they do and all that they're a part of, and they're only surrounded by other people with disabilities, that can be very isolating. And that all people should have the opportunity and ability to engage in the community around them, and the people that they choose. So any HCBS service has to show that it is accessing and being a part of the community around that the person is choosing to do so. So there are ways that you want to work with, how can you get one-on-one time for certain services or a smaller group that can go out and do things. And I know COVID in this last year has been really tough to go out and do things, but that's a whole world, reduction that we've all had. But as my goodness, I went snowshoeing this last Sunday and I couldn't believe it. I went to the park and there was hundreds of people outside enjoying a hopefully outside safe area. So anyway, the whole big picture behind the scenes is that people cannot be isolated, and services that are being isolated are not allowed. So there's no magic. They need to be out every hour of the week or whatever, depending on the service. But it's meeting with the person to say, hey, we're here to support you and provide support here, but also help you engage and connect with your community. Build friendships, do activities that are of interest to you, connect and engage with others. With and without disabilities, just as anyone else would. So whether that's going to the library when they're open, going outside and doing outside activities, going to as many free things as you can find or things that the person can afford to do. And then how do you get the staffing support around that, and working through with the case manager and working through the frameworks to say how much one-on-one time or how much small group time can we do to be able to support these community-based activities where we're away from. So it doesn't mean everybody's leaving at one time, right? And going to one thing. It's really individualized to the person that they're engaging and connecting with the community around and activities that interest them. And hopefully building relationships, right? We have a lot of lonely people that have not been able to build relationships outside of the bubble of people they've always been with. And how do we help encourage that?
We have just a couple more questions.
All right, I was wondering timeline. I thought, we'll get through them. And thank you for those that have hung on. So we'll get through the last few here.
Will integrated community support be covered by the elderly waiver?
Integrated community support, which is that is not. I don't believe. I really want to look it up, but I can't. But integrated community support, I think, is only available under the 4 disability waivers, which are CAC, CADDY, brain injury waiver, and developmental disabilities. And again, we have some available this year and some in hopefully 2023.
Is the integrated community support going to eliminate family foster care?
No. Okay, so integrated community support are the apartment programs. There is no family foster care is transitioning to family residential services. And that is the service that is a transition, and for people that want and love and are choosing that service, that's still available and still part of the waiver menu. Integrated community supports is really for customized living that are supporting people on a disability waiver, or customized living that are supporting people on a disability waiver. Or I said that twice, customized living or the apartment programs. Those are transitioning to the integrated community support model. not family foster care. Family foster care now is called family residential services. It's still a service. It's still available for people that are choosing to live with a family that is a good match to them.
Is STAR going to be offering any more detailed trainings on these different new services?
No. So the services, really, all the services are kind of changing name, the ones that we covered. The only new one is the integrated community support with apartment program switching. But the service, what that looks like and how that's done, that's really developed as a provider. You develop what does that look like and what do the people want and how do we deliver that? What STAR offers and how we usually come into play is we do the compliance. This is what 245D says. This is how you comply with the basic or intensive parts of 245D. We also do person-centered planning. So if people that you're supporting are saying, I don't like what I'm receiving, I want something different, we do a lot of person-centered planning to help talk with people about what are they looking for, what is important to them, and how can that best be delivered, and what do those services look like.
If a client goes into the hospital on waiver services, when they are released, do we have to create all the paperwork over again, or does the service agreement contract just continue?
Oh, these are really technical. So you don't have to create all the paperwork again. You want to reference it. So if someone goes into the hospital and then comes out and has more support needs, or things are different now in their life because of whatever happened, you want to evaluate that self-management assessment. You might want to evaluate the CSSP addendum and other things and outcomes. Maybe someone was planning something and now we're working towards something with their outcome, and now because of this maybe physical change that they've had or increased needs, they want to switch. So you always want to reflect your paperwork and be timely, not just be held to the annual date, but really be timely and reflective of what's going on in that person's life right now, and having those conversations and making those updates to be reflective of what the person's needs are. As far as if they exited the waiver and got back on the waiver, and that resulted in a service change from family foster care to family residential, it doesn't mean that you're doing an annual paperwork. You're going to hold that for the annual meeting, and that's when you're going to have a new service. But you've always had to do intensive paperwork for that, and you're just going to continue to do intensive paperwork for that. So I hope that answers the question.
And our final question: is DHS working on a case management reimagine?
So case management as a service, boy, we've seen changes. As it used to be all county based, and now we see a lot of contracted case managers across the board. And there is case management. I have not been paying attention to all the changes or the works, but there are stakeholder groups. There are, I think I just maybe lost my screen. There are stakeholder groups. There are different conversations happening, and that is I don't know if they're calling it Reimagine. I don't know what they're calling it, but they're looking at case management and how do case management services be delivered for people that makes most sense and that is most helpful to people. So what is great about our system now and the wonderful case managers out there now, what other things could be done to improve it?
And that's it for questions.
And that's it. All right. Well, thank you all for hanging on so long. I see we had a good number of you stay on for questions. Again, the CBSM and the DHS Waiver Reimagine pages and the emails for DHS are your best resource. Hopefully you're finding and hopefully anything that I said, yes, email us and we'll figure out the answer for you. We'd love to help you out in that way too. So thank you for participating. We're so glad you joined us today. Take care.